welcome to another episode of Codo Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman.
To anyone who saw the title of this episode and the movie I'm going to talk about,
I'm going to review Dogman the movie. And this movie will mark my first time reviewing a movie from 2025. This movie is obviously one of the more current movies that is in theaters as of February 10th because Dogman came out towards the end of January, and so far it's only been a couple of weeks. It's been doing pretty good. It's been doing pretty good lately. Now, of course, you're probably wondering what is this? What is this Dogman movie really about? Well, this movie is based on a comedic graphic novel of the same name, created by author Dave Pilkey, who to anybody to anybody who is listening probably know who Dave Pilkey is. He is the author of the Captain Underpants books, which ended with this 12th entry. Now, of course, with Dogman at the time after Captain Underpants ended, it's basically a new story. However, the name Dogman was actually mentioned in the first Captain Underpants book, so Dogman was basically an in-universe character. However, after the Captain Underpants book ended, Dave Pilkey decided to do a book series that centers around Dogman, which is a new hero with the body of a police officer named Officer Knight and the head of Greg the Dog sewn together. And there are 13 books of the Dogman series so far, with the latest book, Dogman Big Jim Begins, was released on December 3rd of 2024, with a 14th book titled Dogman Big Jim Believes was announced and set to release in fall of 2025. Now, of course, with the movie is obviously very similar too, and and to anybody who's listening, you're all probably wondering, what's the point of Dogman? Like, think of it for a second. Like, you hear a movie that's titled Dogman, right? You're thinking like, Dogman? And I'm just like, what, you never heard of him? Well, apparently Dogman is basically a mix of a human-dog hybrid, where you get the head of a dog being sewn on top of the man's body. It turns into a crime-fighting superhero named Dogman. And that's basically the whole point, right? Dogman? As ridiculous as it sounds, it is pretty clever. Now, as with the movie, Dogman came out in 2025. It actually came to theaters on January 15th of 2025 outside of the US, and on January 31st, 2025 is when it was released in the United States. So anyway, this movie is produced by DreamWorks Animation and distributed by Universal Pictures. It is a spin-off and story within a story of Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, which came out in 2017, and the second film in the Captain Underpants franchise. The film was written and directed by Peter Hastings, who actually plays two characters in the name of Officer Knight, and of course the vocal effects of Dogman. And the film also stars Pete Davidson, Lil Rey Howery, Isla Fisher, Poppy Lou, Stephen Root, Billy Boyd, and Ricky Gervais. And of course, as I mentioned, the film was released in 2015. It was actually released outside of the US on January 15th of that year, and of course, released in the United States on January 31st. The film has a runtime of 89 minutes, so it's basically an hour and a half movie, and of course, the film's budget was $40 million, and so far, it grossed over $66 million. And is actually doing pretty well at the box office so far, so that's actually a pretty good start for the new year, I guess. Well, for this movie, I should say. And it actually received positive reviews from critics. Like, a lot of people actually like this movie. And I actually saw this movie myself as well. Like, I went to see this movie last week, and after watching it, I had fun with it. This is a fun movie to watch. I mean, yeah, it's a kids movie, but it does have a sense of fun to it. So, Anyway, I thought it would be good to break down this movie, shall we? Now, of course, with this movie being one of the first 2025 movies I'm going to talk about, plus this movie is still in theaters, so major spoilers ahead, folks. So anyway, this movie opens up with a villainous orange cat named Petey, who is being played by Pete Davidson, who constantly terrorizes OK City with one of his schemes involving planting a bomb to destroy an abandoned warehouse. Famed cop officer named Officer Knight and his dog Greg, being voiced by Peter Hastings, who is the film's director and writer. The two are basically pursuing this cat, this evil cat, Petey, who is an orange tabby, and the two arrive at this abandoned warehouse to defuse a bomb. And right out of the gate, there's a lot going on. Like, we are in this city called OK City, and it turns out that it's not okay because Petey the cat is basically putting a bomb inside an abandoned warehouse, and Officer Knight and his dog Greg are trying to defuse this bomb, but somehow Officer Knight cuts the wrong wire. He cuts the green wire because he hears the growl of Greg growling, like he's saying grrr, grrr, grrr. Like, you notice right away, like, for those of you who have seen this movie, you probably notice that right away that he's putting at either the red wire or the blue wire, right? And if you look closely, it almost seems like he is pointing at the blue wire, although it could indicate that he's pointing at the red wire too, but he's pointing at both wires at the same time, but it kind of indicates that he is pointing at the blue wire. But unfortunately, Officer Knight cuts the wrong wire. He cuts the green wire, and he actually asks this question to Greg: "Wait a minute, are dogs colorblind?" And the bomb goes off. Yeah, right there. So anyway, two surgeons save Officer Knight and Greg by stitching Greg's head onto Knight's body, creating the dog-human hybrid, Dogman. And this comes in full circle when there was a news story by a news reporter named Sarah Hatoff, who's being voiced by Isla Fisher, and she is doing this story on the dog Greg and Officer Knight's in this hospital. Like, Officer Knight's head is covered up. Like, his entire face is blown up, while the dog's entire body is blown up too. So basically, you only see the head of Greg the dog and the entire body of Officer Knight. And the surgeons decided to come up with this idea of stitching the dog's head with Officer Knight's body. And what's a bit funny too is that Officer Knight gives the thumbs up, and he was like, "Okay, let's do it," unknowing on the fact that, yeah, Officer Knight did not live to tell the tale on this one, folks. But if anything, Dogman was created. Even the reporter was like, "Dogman!" So Dogman quickly becomes beloved for his repeated arrests of Petey the cat, creating a heated rivalry between the two, but becomes lonely and depressed due to the loss of his owner, girlfriend, and house. And you hear that right, because Greg is now Dogman, and of course, Officer Knight is no more. Like, Officer Knight is no more, folks. And Dogman is all alone without his owner, the owner's wife, and house. This house real estate agent of some sort sells Officer Knight's house upon his death, and this realtor just tells Dogman, "Oh yeah, this officer's wife decided to move on. Didn't want to, like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna wait for this Dogman person. I'm gonna move on and get a new partner, right?" Like, that's what this house realtor tells Dogman. Like, Dogman, Dogman's heart get Dogman's heart gets broken to the point where he's all alone right now. Like he has no home anymore until this house realtor gives Dogman some new new sales for a house, and one of them featured a doghouse, to which Dogman buys. While I'm glad Dogman was able to get a new house, it is upsetting to see that Dogman has to be on his own without his owner. Like we see some visions from Dogman of like what his life was like with Officer Knight and Officer Knight's wife, right? But unfortunately, that is no more. So Dogman takes a tennis ball he used to play with and moves into a doghouse on the city outskirts. And of course, Petey the cat, who is back in his evil lair, like he fires this assistant. Petey had an assistant. Uh, Basically, the name is Butler, who's being played by Poppy Lou, and Petey fires this butler or assistant, and I really like how she comes back every time to tell Petey like, "Oh yeah, you owe me a paycheck," and Petey was like, "But I already paid you," and this assistant was like, "Hey, chocolate gold coins and beer bottles do not count as payment." There are a few times she comes back to remind Petey that Petey owes this girl a paycheck, right? Oh my goodness. Oh man. But Petey realizes that he needs another assistant. But even before then, he realizes that this dog man is now a Supa Cop, right? He's like, this dog is now Supa Cop. Like he gets all crazy about it, and of course I need to mention this too. Like Petey escaped multiple times from prison, like, and he gets a cellmate, and I think his cellmate is a big giant gray cat, and I think his name is Big Jim, I believe. And there were a couple times where a couple times of Petey escapes from Jim's help. Like there was one time where Petey is on the seesaw and Big Jim, who is big, goes on the seesaw and launches Petey out of prison. And then there was another time where there was a bunch of balloons were brought to prison, and Petey takes all the balloons and flies out and flies away and floats up in the air to escape prison. And Dogman really stops Petey multiple times. Like there was one time where Dogman stops Petey while surfing. Although I wouldn't say surfing, but but Petey almost drowned, but Dogman saves him by surfing on this tidal wave. And of course, he gets arrested. And then there were other times where he got arrested too. But unfortunately, this gets the attention of the mayor because the mayor is so fed up of Petey escaping prison, right? And like she is mad at the police chief, who's being played by Lil Rey Howery. And I'll be honest, Lil Rey Howery as the police chief is pretty fun. Is pretty funny to be honest. Like he is this hot-tempered police chief, and so is that mayor as well. Like the mayor is being played by Sherry O'Terry, and Sherry O'Terry is like, yeah, Petey escaped again, and again. To the point where there was a moment in the scene where it cuts back to Petey saying again while escaping prison, and and that's nice little humor right there. And we even get a moment where the mayor gives the chief this phone number to call on to this phone number, and he calls the line, and this guy picks up and says, "Life's not fair. Life's not fair." And the reason why, because the mayor wants Dogman off the case because of the number of times Petey escaped. Like it's very upsetting. Like the rivalry is huge, but the mayor does not play games over here. Like she wants Petey arrested, but not with the help, but not with Dogman's help. Sadly. Going back to Petey's lair, Petey decides to clone himself by ordering this cloning machine, and and he clones himself by taking a strand of his DNA or his whiskers, puts it in the slot of the cloning machine, and it, of course it creates another variant of him. Although however, Petey misread the instructions. It creates a copy of him as an innocent child with no interest in evil doing, whom he calls Little Petey. And I like this funny little detail too. Like, Petey reads the instructions and he wants to undo the mistake, but unfortunately, there is an undo button that is sold separately. And that's it's so funny too. It's so funny too. And another little detail is that his little clone, like, he sees his little clone and realizes that he has to wait 18 years until his little clone evolves into an evil cat. Oh my goodness. So Petey did Petey not read the reviews of this cloning machine? In fact, another little detail too, on the ratings for when he ordered that machine, there's only a half-star review for this cloning machine. So that means to those who have ordered it and used it, did not like this machine at all because of the fact of what was in the instructions, right? Right? So I guess Petey not only read the instructions, but did not read any of the ratings for this. Oh man. Petey gets annoyed by little Petey, and at times little Petey cries a little bit, and it's so fun. It's just so funny. Like, there are moments between Petey and little Petey just steals the show. And little Petey is being voiced by Lucas Hopkins Calderon, and Petey's a kind-hearted kitten clone of Petey, and becomes Dogman's adopted son and sidekick. So anyway, Petey has a plan, right? Petey wants to do more evil things so he can stop all do-gooders, right? Do-gooders. And his next plan is basically stealing the corpse of an evil dead telekinetic fish named Flippy, and plans to use the living spray factory to resurrect him and defeat Dogman. But unfortunately, little Petey interferes. Now, before that, um, the chief gives Dogman a new job. Like, he wants Dogman, and this was in the film's trailers, by the way. Like, he gives Dogman another job. It's basically like a security job where Dogman has to look at the monitors to keep an eye out for Flippy not being stolen. And this part is basically funny, but it's also the chief's fault, because the chief is basically telling Dogman to look at the monitors, but also telling him that if anybody holds this certain item, like if anybody holds your favorite chew toy, you look at the monitor. And if somebody happens to hold up a dog bone, you look at the monitor. And if someone happens to bring up a gray squirrel, you look at the monitor. Every time the chief tells Dogman about these items, Dogman turns around. But what he doesn't know is that Petey is breaking in and stealing Flippy. And this is pretty funny. Like, it's so funny, but also at the same time, I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you telling Dogman this now while Petey is going in for the prize? Oh my goodness. Like, what is with this movie? But again, you gotta expand your disbelief on that. So anyway, Petey steals Flippy and flies on this giant mechanical yellow jacket, and he flies over to this factory. It's the living spray factory. He's about to drop Flippy into this big chimney, but unfortunately, little Petey interferes, and Petey accidentally drops Flippy into a smaller chimney that can block the mechanics of this factory. So Petey decides to abandon little Petey in a cardboard box in the middle of the city, and I'm just like, what are you doing? And of course, Petey tries to sell it to this woman who, to which this woman doesn't know that, oh yeah, this is a free kitty for sale, right? But she only has $1, and she gives that dollar to Petey, and she takes little Petey and decides to give little Petey a different name, but little Petey doesn't like that, and insults the lady, and the rest is just basically history, man. So Petey decides to leave little Petey behind in the middle of the city, and Dogman finds little Petey and decides to adopt him. So little Petey is basically with Dogman inside his doghouse, and I really love this nice detail that on the outside it's just basically a regular doghouse, but on the inside it's much more. And it kind of reminds me of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, where Harry and his friends they were basically attending a Quidditch match in Ireland, and they go inside this tent. And if you notice right away, the tent on the outside is small, but on the inside it's much more. It's bigger on the inside. The same can be said with Dogman's house. It's small on the outside, but it's real big on the inside. And that's actually pretty clever, and I really loved it. It's basically like an actual house for Dogman's house, right? But it looks like an actual house on the inside, right? And little Petey and Dogman, they actually get along pretty well. Like, we get a moment where little Petey and Dogman are playing piano, and it's a cute moment too. You know, it's also cute knowing the funny too, knowing the fact that there is a bit of a meme or video where there is a cat playing piano, and that's pretty cute too. But also to mention this too, it is also revealed that Dogman plays piano for the elderly folks whenever he's not on duty, and I thought that was a nice little mention of that. And that was mentioned by the reporter in the beginning of the movie. So back at the lair, Petey discovers a picture book drawn by little Petey depicting both of them as a family. And this hits Petey pretty hard too, and he feels guilty about it. And we also found out in this movie too is that Petey also had a dad as well. Unfortunately, Petey's dad abandoned him as a child. So Petey uses his orb-shaped mech named ADHD. Huh, get it? 80, number 80, HD, ADHD, wink wink. So he uses his ADHD mech to kidnap little Petey, or Catsnap, I should say. So Petey reveals to his clone, or son, that his abusive father abandoned him as a child. And in an attempt to cheer him up, little Petey uses ADHD to bring Petey's father, called Grandpa by little Petey, to his lair. And Grandpa, who's actually being played by Stephen Root, immediately starts berating Petey, revealing that he has not changed despite little Petey's hopes. And to the film's credit, though, I do like that bit of a moment between little Petey and Petey talking about, about being a father. Now, it's a nice moment, and I do like that moment where little Petey's like, well, maybe your dad has changed. You never know. And to be honest, I could definitely see that. I could definitely see that. But unfortunately, that was not the case when little Petey's dad came by, and of course his name is Grandpa. His name is Grandpa, and Grandpa's like, "Whoa, what is this dump? Is that my grandson?" And oh man, like Grandpa's just basically all over the place, berating Petey, and later on at the Living Spray factory, there were some factory employees who found Flippy inside the mechanics of the factory, and he's being mishandled. But unfortunately, this causes the factory itself to come to life, and Flippy is resurrected. Now, Flippy is being voiced by Ricky Gervais. And of course, he's reprogrammed by Petey to destroy all do-gooders, and he targets Dogman and his friends, who fight a horde of giant buildings affected by the living spray. Like, the living spray comes to life first. The living spray factory talks, but the only words you hear from the living spray is Gooba Gaba. Like, that's what you hear. Those are the only words you hear from this giant building. And Flippy was like, "Arise, my building! Arise!" Like, you can't make this stuff up, folks. Flippy and this giant living spray building recruits other buildings. Like, one building features this laser tag building. Another building is just basically looks like a Neapolitan ice cream sandwich building. There are a few other buildings as well. One of them also features the exercise or gym, or the gym or the health center. There's another one that's basically a radio station that actually features Dave Pilkey's last name, and I believe it's called Pilkey Station, I believe, or Radio Pilkey, I believe. But anyway, like, Flipper has an huge army of buildings rampaging the city, and Dogman, who basically Dogman comes out to fight Petey, but unfortunately Petey has a trick up his sleeve. Like, Petey was going to defeat Dogman by throwing squirrel grenades. That is basically a bomb, and like grenades, right? There are basically grenades, and the news reporter is seeing all of it. Like, she realizes that Petey has squirrel grenades that blow up, and she says, "How evil can one cat be?" And Petey was like, "Pretty evil, old Dogman." My goodness. So anyway, while this is all going on, like, Petey's driving this tank. He's got a tank, right? And Dogman stops Petey in the tank on top of a building, and this was from the help of this ridiculous bridge that basically have bombs on it. And if you remember from the beginning of the movie, Officer Knight and Greg the dog were driving through the city. They were going over this bridge, this ridiculous bridge that is being worked on to chase Petey, and it had them go straight up. And in the end of the movie, it happens again, but this time there are bombs on it. So, who puts bombs on a bridge that is under construction? I don't get that. But anyway, Dogman stops Petey on top of this building, but unfortunately, there are a boatload of buildings about to attack the city, and Flippy is behind all of it. So, Dogman and Petey decide to team up, so to say, right? So Dogman and Petey team up, and they fight all the buildings. They fight all those buildings by building a giant robot mailman, and it's so funny too. Like, this whole fight is hilarious, and this giant robot mailman defeats all the buildings except for a couple, and little Petey comes in with this ADHD robot mechanism, and he calls himself RoboCat. Get it? RoboCat, RoboCop, right? So anyway, with all the buildings destroyed, Flippy decides to, like, Flippy tries to take Petey out to this volcano. Like, he's gonna drop Petey into this volcano, right? Like, he's about to put Petey inside a volcano with the ADHD mech, and before that happens, little Petey arrives and shows him a comic book depicting them as friends, making him drop his evil ways. And Dogman sacrifices his old tennis ball to save Petey from falling in the lava. And then Flippy gets arrested. And of course, Petey is actually pardoned as a do-gooder for his actions by the mayor. and Petey refuses to be considered a do-gooder. He and little Petey return to their lair to find out that Grandpa took everything except for little Petey's books. And Petey decides to share custody of his son with Dogman, and he heads back with a new outlook on life. And if you pay attention, and because in the middle of the movie, Petey mentions to his clone that life is not all great. Like, he describes some parts of life, like where, like, he sees a lake that has a beer bottle, that has a wine or beer bottle in it, and he just says, "Oh yeah, that water's polluted." And he looks at weeds and he's like, "Oh yeah, those weeds are bad." And Petey hates everything in life, and also knowing the fact that Petey didn't have much of a childhood since his dad left him. Like, his dad left him in his giant truck, to which that's what he did at the end of the movie. Like, he took everything from Petey's lair and he moves out. So yeah, it comes back to bite, and it came back to bite him. Nice little foreshadowing right there. And because now, since Petey is being described as a do-gooder, even though he doesn't see himself as one, Petey has a new outlook on life. Like, he picks the bottle up from that lake, and he puts those dandelion weeds into this bottle, basically creating a nice little vase, and he takes it with him. So basically, little Petey is with Dogman, and suddenly Chief and Sarah arrive at Dogman's house to inform him and little Petey that another sentient building is on the loose. That is being the laser tag one, or the glow stick parlor. And however, it quickly turns out to be friendly, and it goes into a nice little dance sequence, right? Gooba gaba! And I'm not kidding. That's how the movie ends. That's how the movie ends. And as crazy as this movie is, I love it. I love it. I had fun with it. This was a fun movie. Now, of course, the story wise, I guess I thought the story itself was pretty good. Sure, yeah, it's more of a kid friendly feel, but it's fun. It's a fun story overall. Now, voice acting wise, I thought the voice acting in this movie was pretty good. Peter Hastings providing the vocal effects for Dogman, I thought that was a very good idea. And I'm glad that he was not given any dialogue, because if Dogman was given dialogue in this movie, I believe it would have ruined the character, in my opinion. So having Peter Hastings do the vocal, just the dog effects, the barkings, you know what I'm saying? I thought that was a good idea. Have him not talk, but just do what a normal dog does. And Lil Rey Howery as the chief, I thought he was very funny, and I also find it funny, and it comes out of nowhere. The chief has a crush on this news reporter. It's the female news reporter that Isla Fisher plays, and it comes out of nowhere, but it's pretty hilarious, and that comes at the end of the movie. And one thing I didn't realize too is Billy Boyd. Billy Boyd plays the cameraman named Seamus, and his voice is very gruffy, right? First I thought it was Ricky Gervais, but no, Ricky Gervais plays the fish, Flippy, to which I thought he did a very good job with. I mean, Ricky Gervais is funny. He's, to anybody who knows Ricky Gervais, he goes after everybody. In terms of stand-up comedy, like, he goes after everybody. He roasts a lot of people. And knowing him, he does a good job, and he does a good job with it. Like, he voiced Flippy very well in this movie. And I thought he was the one who played the cameraman, but no, it was Billy Boyd. And Billy Boyd's voice was gruffy, and to me, that worked very well, because I could not recognize Billy Boyd's voice. And that's good. And to anybody who knows who Billy Boyd is, Billy Boyd played the Hobbit named Pippin in the Lord of the Rings movies. Although that time around, his voice was more high pitched in those movies. But in this movie, his voice was a lot more gruffier than what he sounded like as Pippin in the Lord of the Rings movies, if you know what I'm saying. But I really enjoyed it. I really do. But I really liked Billy Boyd as the cameraman in this movie, going on alongside with Isla Fisher. Now, Isla Fisher was a good choice too. She played the news reporter Sarah Hatoff. You know, hats off to you. And Isla Fisher, this is another voiceover role that she has done. Like, some of her voiceover roles included the Tooth Fairy from the Rise of the Guardians movie, and the lizard Beans from Rango. And the difference with those roles is that Isla Fisher used an American accent in Rango and Rise of the Guardians, while in Dogman, Isla Fisher used her Australian accent for that movie. Like, this is actually true because Isla Fisher was actually born in Australia, and I thought that was a good move on Isla Fisher. You know, using her Australian accent rather than going for an American accent. Like, I thought that was a good idea. You know, but anyway, Pete Davidson, who played Petey the cat, was a real good choice. Like, at first I thought Pete Davidson was going to be Dogman, but no, Pete Davidson was playing the cat Petey, and I thought that was a good choice that was made by the filmmakers. So that was a real good choice, and Pete Davidson did a real good job. It almost sounds like he's using, I guess, an Ohio accent, maybe a New York accent, a little bit. I thought he did pretty good with it. And Little Petey really stole the show in this movie. Like, the voice actor for Little Petey, he did a real good job voicing Little Petey. Even Stephen Root as Grandpa, despite his short screen time appearance, he was a good choice too. And now we're gonna move forward, and I will talk about a little trivia for you. Like the book series, Dogman is a spin-off of Captain Underpants, and Dogman is the fictional comic book created by George Beard and Howard Hutchins. To which I know I've already mentioned that Dogman was mentioned in the first Captain Underpants book, but George Beard and Howard Hutchins actually made cameo appearances in this movie twice. The first time we see George Beard and Howard Hutchins was in the beginning of the movie. They were basically walking into the city while Greg and Officer Knight are in pursuit of Petey the cat. And if you look at the background, and it's a bit hard to see, but you do see George Beard and Howard Hutchins walking into town a little bit. They're basically in the shadow. They're basically walking in the shade, if you know what I'm saying. Like, you see George Beard and Howard Hutchins in the shade walking into town. There was another time the two made another cameo appearance, and that was at the end of the movie where the giant buildings were coming to life, and we hear and we cut to George and Harold at the park, and the two see giant buildings walking through the cities. Now, George does not talk in this movie, but Harold does, and Harold sees the building, and he was like, "Oh, hey, look at that! I can see my house from here." And Harold was being played by Kelly Stables. Harold was previously voiced by Thomas Middleditch in the Captain Underpants movie, while George Beard was voiced by Kevin Hart. Now, like I said, George does not talk in the Dogman movie. It's Harold who talks. And George and Harold are the creators of Dogman in the Captain Underpants universe. And another fun fact, the first act of the film parallels the plot of RoboCop from 1987, in which a slain police officer is reincarnated as a super cop. As he grapples with the memories of his past life, he visits his old home and questions his identity. And I'll be honest, I didn't catch that at all. Like, the only RoboCop reference that I got from this movie was when little Petey was controlling Mecha ADHD, and he calls himself RoboCat. But in all honesty, though, I didn't think the first act would parallel RoboCop, and that's something I didn't know. But I'm glad that I found this out in this trivia. So that's actually a pretty nice homage to RoboCop, because in RoboCop, the main character was a police officer, but unfortunately he gets shot down. He gets shot multiple times, left in limbs, and his body is reincarnated into a robot, kind of like how Dogman is kind of like how Greg the dog is reincarnated to part dog, part man, right? That's a nice reference to RoboCop. And of course, Dogman is the third DreamWorks superhero movie after Megamind and Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. And here's another fun trivia for you. Before the title was announced, the film was rumored to be titled Dogman, the first graphic movie, or Dogman, the Bark Knight. And the latter title, Dogman, the Bark Knight, that's a nice play on words on Batman, the Dark Knight. Get it? Batman, the Dark Knight, the Dark Knight. You know, the Dark Knight with Christian Bale's Batman and Heath Ledger's Joker, right? And here's a fun fact about Petey's dad. Petey's dad, the name of Petey's dad was never mentioned in the movie. However, Petey's dad's full name, unlike the books, where it is Crud, is Garfield F. Heathcliff, which is a nod to the three most famous animated cats, Garfield, Heathcliff, and of course the F standing for Felix, which is Felix the cat. And a couple more things to mention. The film's climax reveals that it's Flippy, the telekinetic fish that Petey ended up resurrecting, and not Petey himself, that's the real main villain. Interesting enough, Flippy's voice actor Ricky Gervais has voiced a cat in two previous animated films, being Willoughby's and Paul's a Furry, The Legend of Hank. Now, even before I saw this movie, I thought Petey was going to be the main villain. I didn't think Flippy was going to be the main villain. But unfortunately, I think as the film goes on, we find out about this dead fish, right? Which is Flippy. And Flippy, it turned out to be the main villain the whole time. And if you also pay attention to the police chief mentions this whole Flippy situation. Like, Flippy was a thing before that the police chief stopped before, and he takes Flippy to this giant spray factory that comes to life at the end of the movie, right? And I think Flippy being the villain of this movie, I thought that was a good idea. Now, speaking of Petey is the third character in a DreamWorks animated film that was set up as a main antagonist, which would have gotten proven wrong come the climax, where it's revealed that the real main villain is Flippy the fish. The other two films have been Turbo with Kim Lee, where the real main villain is Guy Gani, and Abominable with Burnish, where the real main villain is Dr. Zara. Another fun fact is, an opposite but similar plot twist happens in this movie from what happened with Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. In terms of secondary villain, one film had a good guy turn bad named Melvin Sneedy. By having him team up with the main villain, Professor Poopy Pants, Witless, the other, had a bad guy turn good guy, Petey, for example, due to there being someone that's more of a villain than him, which is Flippy. I thought that was a pretty smart way for the writers to go beyond the story. Like yeah, the trailer had it set up as Petey as the villain, but no, it turns out, nope, there was someone else. There was someone else in the story, and it turned out to be Flippy the fish, to which he was mentioned in this movie by the chief and set up as the main villain once he was brought back to life. And one more thing to mention, I mentioned that Dogman was basically playing piano for the old folks, but is also mentioned by the reporter that that Dogman also, goes after the mailman, because knowing dogs, dogs really love to go after the mailman. It's also mentioned too that Dogman was pitching a softball game, and it was actually a charity event for kids who got in trouble in school and decided to write comic books. And that part alone, when I heard that part where the whole softball game that was used as a non-profit charity event for kids who got in trouble in school and decided to write comic books, I thought that was more of a double entendre on Dave Pilkey and George Beard and Howard Hutchins, because in the Captain Underpants books, George and Harold get in trouble a lot in school for doing these crazy pranks, and of course they will write comic books, and the same thing can be said with Dave Pilkey, because in Dave Pilkey's childhood, he gets in trouble in school a lot, and he sits out in the hallway on a desk, and during the time when he's out in the hallway, he will write comic books. I thought that was a funny little reference in this movie. And that's basically about it for this trivia. And one more thing, the animation in this movie, I really like the animation in this movie. Like, the animation is really good. It has a bit of a stop motion feel to it, unlike the first Captain Underpants movie, which was animated by Micro's Image and Technicolor Animation Productions. Dogman's animation is handled by Jellyfish Pictures, who previously did the animation for DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon Homecoming and Spirited Untamed, along with marketing custom animation for Trolls World Tour and providing additional production assets for The Boss Baby, Family Business, The Bad Guys, and Kung Fu Panda 4, while Nate Ragg was the production designer. I actually like the animation in Dogman. Even though the animation is a little different from the Captain Underpants movie, I still like it, and it had a bit of a stop motion feel to it just for a little bit as well. And I do like the comic book textures that they put into this movie, especially in the moments where a police chief tells Dogman to, "Would you get out of here? Go and arrest Petey, and I don't care if it takes a montage." Because in the movie, you see the text, you see the subtitle text of "I don't care if it takes a montage" pop up in the background. That is just basically paper animation, and I thought that was really, really good. Like, the animation that they use in this movie is really good, especially some of the paper animation that they use for some moments of this movie, especially that whole montage line. But anyway, that's basically about it. So there you have it, folks. That is my breakdown on the Dogman movie. This movie is still in theaters. It's doing pretty well at the box office, and to be quite honest, I highly recommend going to see this movie. And if I were to give a rating on this movie, I give it an 8 out of 10. It's a good, fun movie to watch. Sure, it may be a kid's movie, but at the same time, it's got a sense of fun to it, especially for a film that is based off of Dave Pilkey's book, Dogman. But anyway, that will wrap up this episode. So to anyone who is listening, what did you guys think of Dogman? Did you like this movie? Did you not like this movie? Have you seen this movie? I would love to hear your thoughts. But anyway, that will be a wrap on this episode. Thank you all for tuning into Codo Cinema. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. Remember to watch movies and stay positive.